Hello, and welcome to the Occupied Thoughts podcast. I'm Peter Beinart, a non-resident fellow with the Foundation for Middle East Peace. Today, I am joined by Sawsan Zaher, who's Deputy General Director and Director of the Social and Economic Rights Unit at Adalah, the legal center for Arab minority rights in Israel. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about the International Criminal Court's recent ruling that it has jurisdiction over Israeli and Palestinian actions in the occupied West Bank and elsewhere. Sawsan, would you just maybe start by telling us what the ICC decision was and what's significant about it?
Yeah, sure. I think it's important to start with what the ICC decision is about and what it is not about. First of all, we're talking about preliminary steps that would enable the prosecutor to decide whether he or she wants to open the criminal investigation. He or she, because now there's a shift between Bensouda to Karim Khan, who was elected recently and would get into office in June, and is assumingly the prosecutor who will decide on whether to open investigation or not. So the current decision basically says whether there is an authority and jurisdiction for the court in order to start with a criminal investigation. So this is only the start of what can later be an opening of a criminal investigation against persons, individuals, not against a state or a semi-state, not against Israel and not against Palestine, but against persons who will be found criminally liable on crimes that are set inside the statute. Now, what happened is that in December 2019, the chief prosecutor Bensouda back then finished an almost 5 years investigation inquiry in order to check whether there is an option to decide officially on opening criminal investigation. But before she did that, and because of the political sensitivity of the situation between Palestine and Israel, she decided to refer the question of jurisdiction to the judges themselves. Because there were many reasons. First of all, on an international level, Palestine is just an observer state and not a sovereign state based on the general international law norms. And also because Israel is not a party to the ICC. It did sign it in 2002, but it didn't ratify. So basically, it didn't agree to the jurisdiction of the court. So the situation is a little bit delicate on legal terms, and of course on political level, it's also delicate because of the political pressure that Israel has been doing throughout the years against any kind of examination by the ICC towards what's happening in Israel and in Palestine. And the decision on February 5th was basically accepting the jurisdiction of the ICC, first of all claiming that for the purpose of the statute itself, Palestine is a member state, and only for the statute itself. It does not, and it clearly said that it will not affect any kind of new recognition of Palestine as a state based on the rest of the international law, but only solely for the Rome Statute. And in terms of the territory that it could hold its jurisdiction, it was clear that it is based on the ICC ruling from February that it's talking about the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. That doesn't mean, again, that the investigation is open. There still needs to be a path for it to be opened. On the other hand, it doesn't mean that it's just a technical decision, because it is a symbolic, political, and legal statement from the court that the rights of the victims, of the persons, individuals who are living under a blockade in Gaza and under occupation, West Bank and Gaza, basically are valid and recognizable, especially that it mentioned and it detailed a lot about the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people in its own decision, in the February decision.
So what would be, they've said they have jurisdiction, but as you say, an investigation hasn't begun, a case hasn't begun. What, how likely do you think that is to when it is to begun? What would be the time frame, and do we have any sense about what the subject matter would actually be?
Let's start with the subject matter, because they are issues that are related to Bensouda's findings so far, especially from the preliminary investigation that she did and ended in December 2019. We're talking mostly about the Gaza war in 2014. We're talking about the settlements, the illegal settlements in the West Bank. And we're talking about Israel's opening fire on Gaza during the return demonstrations in March 2018, which basically led, the usage of the snipers back then, which led to the killings of so many Gazans. So these are the three major subjects that probably will be dealt by. But because of the shift and the election of the new prosecutor Karim Khan, which is being viewed as an Israel favorite election, things like the decision from now on might be a lot political rather than legal, even though the ICC in its statement after it issued its decision stated that there will be no political consideration, and that they, of course, are not taking any consideration to any political statement by Netanyahu or by the US or by Germany or by any others, and the considerations that it's taking are only legal. But we all know that it's all about politics. We all know that if Israel will continue to pressure, as it did with Germany and the Czech Republic so far, it might lead to political pressure that will lead to a decision by the new chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, not to open a criminal investigation. But as a lawyer, as a human rights lawyer, working I'm based in Haifa, but of course we have been working a lot on issues that are related to the illegality of the settlements and the illegality of the opening fires in March 2018, as well as the criminality of the Gaza war on 2014. I can assure you that Bensouda already had in December 2019 enough evidence that would enable her on a criminal level to open an investigation. So what will happen from now on, whether I doubt if Bensouda herself before June would lead or would decide to a new decision to open the investigation. I doubt that. So things might stay in the hands of, or might move to the hands of Karim Khan, and then politics would be a major issue. We hope not, of course, but that might be the case.
So it will be in his decision as the new prosecutor, Karim Khan, to decide whether to actually go forward and bring a case.
Unless Bensouda decides before June, before she steps out of office, but this is very much doubtful. So what will happen next is clearly it should be easy on a legal level, again, especially due to the 5 years preliminary investigation, checking the evidence, checking the testimonies, and reaching out to the decision to ask the ICC to take a decision regarding its jurisdiction, right? So this already gives a hint that what she has on her desk is enough to open a criminal investigation. But we can never know what Karim Khan will decide, if he will decide. But I think that so far, like the decision that we got on February 5th, can still be a victory for Palestinians, even if Karim Khan will not decide on opening criminal investigations.
You made a reference to the idea that the new prosecutor Karim Khan may be someone who is more sympathetic to the Israeli government or less likely to push forward. And I just wonder if you can talk a little bit about the politics that led to his selection.
I'm not sure I have enough information, but from what I read, like we had some information last year when we started to know that Bensouda will finish her position in June 2020. His name was the major name that was popping out each time as the favorite prosecutor to be elected. But I think that one of the unique things that happened this time, especially during the corona and the process of electing the new prosecutor, where no one had the ability to do the corridor talking in the UN, this didn't enable a lot of exposure of the gossip in the corridors of the UN. But his name was popping out throughout a long time, and it was by no surprise that, like for us, it wasn't a surprise that he was elected.
You mentioned earlier that in these cases, they're not cases against the government, if I understand what you're saying. They're cases against individuals. Yeah. So if there were to be a moving forward, as you mentioned, on the Israeli war with Gaza in 2014, or the shooting of the protesters in Gaza in 2018, or settlements in the West Bank, do you have any sense of who would be the likely targets of that prosecution?
There's this issue of the chain of commands, and I think that there has been some talks that we're talking about hundreds of Israeli officials in the IDF, in the Israeli government, and it also reaches politicians. And I want to give you just one example from Benny Gantz, who is basically the minister of the Israeli Minister of Defense, who, when he entered the politics in the election in April 2019, his first campaign was basically how much he was proud that he killed hundreds of Gazans in the Gaza Strip during 2014. He was the commander-in-chief back then, and it's clear that he would be one of the targets. I think the issue of official personnel that gave the orders, including the prime minister, the minister of defense, the military commander, and all the rest are people who are by no doubt the target of such indictment. Again, if we will reach this stage. And by no chance, like just recently, there was a new commander as well that was appointed to deal with all the criminal cases that will be opened against the hundreds of commanders and officials, or the potential to open criminal investigation against them. So we're talking about a good number of persons, of individuals.
So can you talk a bit about the Israeli strategy in response to the ICC and what you think might be the next steps in Israel's efforts to obviously try to make sure this doesn't go forward?
Israel's stand is very clear, opposing from A to Z anything that is related to the operation of the ICC, except its signing in 2002. And except the political, theoretical statements that it gave when the Rome Statute was confirmed, that on a political level it does support the work of the criminal court in order to prevent the horrors of World War II. Despite that, it did not ratify. So this is also another political statement. Because it knew even in 2002 that it might not be able to afford the political and legal implication of ratifying the ICC, knowing that the occupied territories have been occupied since 1967. 7. Now, since the preliminary investigation decision of the current prosecutor, Bensouda, was issued in December 2019, I think things started to become serious. And Israel started as well to see that. I think that even back in 2015, when Palestine joined the ICC as a member state, it started to see that things are becoming serious. And we see that the political pressure that Israel have been posing in terms of putting pressure on each country in Europe and on the United States, the fact that there was an executive order by President Trump back then to put pressure and issue sanctions against the ICC just because the prosecutor asked to give a ruling in the jurisdiction of the ICC regarding the situation of Palestine last year. This executive order still hasn't been canceled by the new Biden administration. So even if we know that it might be more loosened a little bit, but still the order hasn't been canceled. And we know that it has been doing the pressure on each country. And we just saw that with the statement from Germany that it would not allow it would not allow the opening of the investigation. Also, we saw that in putting pressure by the fact that there were more than 40 countries that submitted amicus curiae as countries against the jurisdiction of the ICC when they were able to submit their amicus last year as part of the documents that the ICC should have reviewed in order to reach its decision in February. We do expect that Israel will continue to do that. It's not, we don't know how it will be now with the new administration, but it will also be a good examination for the ICC to see how it would deal with all these political pressures, knowing that all the arguments against it for being biased against Western countries who have the support, especially of the US, would not be dealt and investigated under the ICC, because as we know, it's mostly African countries or African individuals who were sentenced and prosecuted at the ICC. So we need to wait and see, but there are a lot of doubts.
You mentioned that 40 countries filed briefs against the ICC having jurisdiction. Did any countries file briefs in favor?
Actually, no. There wasn't any country that did that, even though there has been a lot of amicus by intellectuals and academics and NGOs and victims, and of course the state of Palestine. And having mentioned as well Israel's stand, it was asked by the ICC also to submit its statement to the ICC, and it refused to do that. And what's interesting as well, by the way, Peter, is that all the states that did submit the amicus against the jurisdiction of the ICC did not have any opposition when Palestine submitted its membership to the Rome Statute. Back then, it was only Canada that opposed the membership of Palestine to the Rome Statute in 2015, and that's it. And Canada itself was not part of the states this time last year when they did submit the amicus. Germany was part of those, but actually it didn't oppose. So that's an interesting way as well to look at it in terms of the politics when we're getting to the serious stuff.
You mentioned briefly the Biden administration. I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about what it has done in response to the ruling, and what you think are the key decisions that it will be making on this question in the
the Biden?
Yes, Biden administration. Yes.
Well, it did, as far as I am aware, it did state that it will listen and it will cancel the executive order of the Trump administration. But so far, we're just talking about statements. Like, we need the we need it to be a fact on the ground. We need the order, first of all, to be cancelled or not to be implemented. These are the actions that need immediately to be undertaken by the Biden administration.
And the Trump executive order said that the U.S. would place sanctions on the ICC prosecutor?
Yes. Yeah, prosecutors and their staff as well. Yeah. Mainly prosecutor and one of his staff. Yes, definitely.
So I wonder if you can talk about how this plays into the kind of the strategy of the Palestinian national movement. How is this? How does this factor into what is the view of Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Liberation Organization on this? Does Hamas or other Palestinian groups take a different view? And how do you see this as part of the larger Palestinian strategy?
Okay, so there are a lot of components. Like, first of all, it is clear that if there will be any criminal investigation opened, it will be opened both on the Israeli individuals and on Hamas members because of the firing of the rockets. However, this in the inside politics, in the inside Palestinian politics, this is not an issue at all, because the grave crimes are known to be done and conducted by the Israeli side. It's known that Israel is the occupying power. It's known that Israel has been blocking Gaza and not vice versa. So the concern about having Hamas members or any other armed group is not a huge concern, and that they are willing basically to take the risk of opening a criminal investigation against such individuals. Now, having reaching the ICC, becoming a member, and then achieving the result of the ICC decision earlier this month, this is a huge victory, because if we look at a lot of the tools of the struggle against the occupation, the struggle to have a Palestinian independent state, the struggle to implement the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people, which has been anchored in several UN resolutions, none of them have been successful so far, whether we're talking about armed struggle, whether we're talking about peace negotiations. Even the Oslo Accords is one of the failures of the Palestinian political history. And I think that referring the issue of the Palestinian statehood, not in the terms, of course, of sovereignty, but at least in terms of the reliability and accountability of Israel on what's happening, on what its conduct in the West Bank and Gaza, the ICC is being the last resort. This is the only thing that has been left to the political level, speaking about the PLO, Abbas, and as well to the Palestinian human rights, civil society, human rights organization, and so on. And this is why it was by no chance that, knowing the risk that, or without relation whether or not there will be investigations open, the fact that there was such, the ICC issued this decision is a very important symbolic on a political level for the Palestinians, because it comes and acknowledges the right to self-determination. It details all the list of UN resolutions that acknowledge the right of the Palestinian people for self-determination. It acknowledges that the jurisdiction or the territory that the jurisdiction applies on is the jurisdiction that falls within the Palestinian occupied territory, naming West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, and not excluding East Jerusalem, which is also important. And the political acknowledgement is a victory in and of itself. So, and I think that this is a result of a few years of work by Palestinian diplomats on an international level, because they started to see, once They became in 2015 when they were able to join the Rome Statute as well and sign and ratify other UN conventions like all the UN treaties. They saw that this can be one of the huge victories that they could achieve on an international level, because it was also a last resort for them.
Do you think that the prospect of a case at the ICC has a deterrent effect on Israeli behavior?
This is a good question, but I'm not sure it does have, because once Israel claims Netanyahu's response to the ICC decision is that Israel will continue to defend itself. When they see that every act is a defensive act, they will continue to do that, because in their eyes it's very defensive. But if we look at what's really happening on the ground from the files that we in Adalah have been dealing since, not only since 2014, already since Castlet in 2008, where war crimes have been conducted. If we'll take the 2014, because it's the most relevant for the ICC ruling, almost 2,000 people were killed, among them 1,500 civilians. More than tens of thousands of homes were demolished. Children, women were killed, and all of our demands to open independent, professional criminal investigations were denied. They were either closed without having any investigation. They were closed after having a very superficial investigation. And basically the complementarity component, which puts a burden on Israel in order to exhaust all remedies before reaching the international court, we see clearly that it has not been met, because this means that if it did feel or express any concern or any kind of regret or any kind of intention of deterrence after, not only after the ICC ruling, because they knew that it would be coming, we would have seen a shift or a change in its legal decisions for the legal proceedings and requests that we have been demanding. And even when we have a look at the Supreme Court rulings regarding issues in the West Bank, mainly the settlements. I'll focus on this as well, because it's the main issue for the upcoming investigations of the ICC. We see that the Israeli Supreme Court does not intervene in issues that are related to the establishment of the settlements, claiming and arguing that it is a political a question, that it cannot intervene in it, even though the issue is in contrast with international law, clearly in a very clear way. I don't think the answer is positive to your question, Peter.
I wanted to, the last question I wanted to ask was just, I've seen reports in the media about talk of passing a law in the Knesset that would penalize institutions in Israel that would hand over information to the ICC. I imagine that Adalah might be such an organization. So I wonder, I guess, what restrictions, if any, so far has the Israeli government put on your work, and how concerned are you that there may be new restrictions in the future?
Well, the intimidations of putting such restrictions is not new. It has been out there since Bensouda started with the preliminary investigation in 2015, after it was asked by the state of Palestine to do that. And the intimidation started by passing laws that would basically lead to the elimination and the closure, the physical closure of the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations that would deal with it. And why was that the case? Because Adalah, in particular, was involved in a lot of demands to open criminal investigations throughout the years, including and especially during the 2014 Gaza war. And it was clear that Adalah is a huge part in what they wanted, who they wanted to intimidate, but of course not only, because there are Israeli human rights organizations that also have been dealing with the aspects of settlement. Now, this is the reason that we as well didn't want to take any kind of risk in terms of having anything to do with the ICC on a direct level, because we knew that if we will do anything like that, we will be exposed to an actual tangible threat that if it doesn't exist today, it might exist in 5 days, in 1 year, in 5 years, and probably would be effective retroactively. That was the reason that we didn't, when we prepared our opinion about the ICC's jurisdiction on the situation of Palestine, we did not submit it to the ICC. We did send it to the Israeli Attorney General. We made sure it would get to the eyes of the prosecutor Bensouda. We did publish it in our website. We made it clear that this is our position based on our legal work in the Israeli Supreme Court. So it's not that we're doing any lobbying or advocacy, because it was basically bringing the facts on the ground before the Supreme Court, the correspondence, the demands, the responses, etc., in order to show that, especially on Gaza, and we did emphasize regarding the jurisdiction on Gaza, where we said that it cannot be that the ICC would reach any kind of decision that it doesn't have any jurisdiction, especially on Gaza, because it created, the Israeli legal system created like a legal black hole that did not enable that it enabled impunity for all Israeli officials. It didn't enable effective remedy for Gaza residents. And this is in contrast, not only based on international law, but also based on Israeli law. Now, what really, I can say that none of the organizations have been dealing with, of the Israeli organizations have been dealing directly with the ICC in terms of submitting amicus, but the threat is there, especially now with, we're having another fourth election in 2 years, while the new government each time in every election cycle is becoming more and more right-wing, knowing that the ICC issue is a very controversial political issue because it would address personal individuals and not the state, and it would have tangible effects. So if things will develop, we will certainly, in our expectations, have some legislation that would pass by the parliament. They're talking about not only civil actions, but criminal actions and reaching to imprisonments.
Well, we will watch what happens. Thank you so much, Sawsan, for our conversation, and thanks to our listeners for tuning in to this episode of the Occupied Thoughts podcast, a project of the Foundation for Middle East Peace. You can visit our website at fmep.org to subscribe to our many resources and find today's podcast episode posted along with links to additional resources about this topic. You can also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Spotify. I'm Peter Beinart, and I look forward to the next episode. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you.